The first wrong thing my husband did was answer a simple question like I had handed him something breakable. It was a Tuesday in March, cold enough in Dayton that the kitchen windows still filmed over at the corners, and I was standing at the counter peeling potatoes for dinner while the local weatherman talked softly from the little radio by the sink about lake effect wind moving south. Ethan came in from work, set his keys in the blue ceramic bowl by the back door, kissed my cheek, and reached for his phone when it lit up. Nothing about that should have stayed with me. What stayed with me was the way he turned the screen over before I could even see who it was, then smiled at me with that calm, careful face, and asked if I needed help with the salad. I remember the potato peeler going still in my hand. Not because husbands never turn their phones over, not because one screen lighting up means anything by itself. It was smaller than that, stranger than that. It was the speed of it, the reflex, like he had already practiced hiding something before I had accused him of having anything to hide. I kept my voice even. "Who's texting?" He was loosening his tie one-handed, looking down into the refrigerator. "Nobody important." I watched his shoulders. "You used to say who?" That made him glance over. He smiled a little, not warmly exactly, but with the patience people use on the elderly or the embarrassed. "Mara." Just my name, soft and level. I went back to the potatoes because standing there with a peeler in my hand and a pulse I didn't trust was too close to feeling foolish. Our kitchen was narrow and old in the way Ohio houses often are, with real wood cabinets that had swollen a little at the hinges and floors that creaked in three particular places no matter how carefully you stepped. We rented the house from a retired couple in Kettering who spent winters in Florida and trusted us because Ethan wore button-down shirts and I worked at the library, and neither of us looked like the kind of people who set fires in kitchen trash cans or missed rent. I had set a crock of grocery store daffodils on the table the week before. Their heads were already drooping. It should have felt ordinary. Pot roast in the oven, potatoes in a bowl of cold water, the smell of onions in butter. Ethan in his shirt sleeves opening a beer before taking out the trash. Instead, it felt like a room where something had been moved half an inch, and only I could tell. At dinner, he was normal in all the visible ways. He asked about the preschool story hour I'd been planning for Saturday at the library. He laughed when I told him one of the regular little boys had informed me very seriously that worms were just outdoor spaghetti. He reached for my glass when I stood up to get more mustard and filled it with water before I asked. If anyone had watched us through the window above the sink, they would have seen a young married couple at a weeknight table under a yellow overhead light eating pot roast off stoneware plates and talking about small things. But his phone stayed face down by his elbow the whole meal. I noticed because Ethan had never been one of those men who guarded objects. He was tidy but not precious. He left receipts in his coat pockets and socks under the bed. He used to hand me his phone to read recipes while he stirred pasta sauce. He once let me answer a text from his college friend Josh because he was carrying 2 bags of mulch through my Aunt Nora's yard and couldn't feel the phone buzzing in his pocket. 3 years of marriage teaches you the difference between privacy and drift. People who say otherwise are usually lying or lonely. After dinner, I carried plates to the sink. He stood beside me drying them, and when his phone buzzed again on the counter, he reached past my arm so quickly his wrist knocked the faucet handle and sent a hard spray of cold water over my sweater. "Oh, sorry," he said, grabbing a dish towel. I laughed automatically because that is what I do when something stings before I've decided whether it should. "You're jumpy tonight." "I'm tired." He was already blotting at the sleeve of my cardigan with the dish towel, gentle, efficient, almost tender. The kind of tenderness that makes a woman feel ungrateful for noticing anything beneath it. I took the towel back from him. "Did something happen at work?" "No." He folded the towel once and set it on the counter. "Why would you ask that? You're just..." I looked for a word that didn't accuse him of anything. Distracted. His eyes changed, then not in a dramatic way, just a quiet cooling. He leaned one hip against the sink and crossed his arms. "You know," he said, "not everything is a signal." I felt heat rise into my face so fast it embarrassed me. I didn't say it was. He gave me that same patient half smile. "I know. I'm just saying you've seemed a little keyed up lately. I don't want you working yourself into a spiral over nothing." There are words that hit the body before they hit the mind. Spiral was one of those words for me. My mother had anxiety. Real anxiety, not the decorative kind people claim when they want to excuse being late or scattered. The kind that made grocery stores too bright sometimes. The kind that turned simple phone calls into rehearsals. The kind that made her apologize for crying while she was still crying. She died when I was 19. And over the years, what remained of her in certain relatives' mouths was not her laugh or the way she tore coupons in neat little stacks at the kitchen table or how she used to leave notes in library books for me to find later. What remained was shorthand. Your mom used to get worked up. Your mom took things hard. Your mom had her episodes. I had spent most of my 20s trying to be the kind of woman no one could reduce that way. So, when Ethan said spiral softly, almost kindly, something old and humiliating opened under my ribs. I rinsed the plates in silence after that. He kissed the top of my head before going upstairs to shower like the conversation had ended gently and correctly, like he had soothed me instead of warning me. I stood in the kitchen with my wet hands braced on the edge of the sink and looked out at the dark backyard where the chain-link fence shone silver under the neighbor's porch light. Somewhere 2 houses over, somebody started a lawnmower that coughed twice and died. The world went on being plain and Midwestern and completely uninterested in my marriage. Later that night, Ethan fell asleep with one arm over his eyes. I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling fan turning shadows across the plaster. He had changed his phone passcode sometime in the past week. I knew because 2 nights earlier I had picked it up to silence an alarm and the number I had known for 3 years no longer worked. I had told myself there were innocent reasons for that. Work security, a software update, an impulse. Marriage, at least the kind people survive, requires a certain willingness to place dull explanations over sharp ones. I had always believed that was maturity. At 10 past midnight, his phone buzzed again on the dresser. He didn't stir. I did. The room was dark except for the red digits of the clock and the thin light from his charging screen. I had no plan to touch it. I only looked. A preview flashed and vanished before the screen went black again. Not a full message, just enough to catch the end of a sentence. Don't say that in front of her again. My heart gave one hard, humiliating thud. I told myself it could be anyone, a sister, a co-worker. A joke carried over from earlier in the day. I told myself normal women did not build stories out of fragments in the dark. I slept badly and woke before the alarm. By the time I came downstairs the next morning, Ethan was already dressed for work in a pale gray shirt and navy tie, standing at the counter with a piece of toast in one hand and his phone in the other. The coffee maker hissed beside him. A school bus sided to a stop somewhere at the end of the block. I set my bag down by the back door. Can I ask you something without you deciding I'm spiraling first? He looked up slowly. It was the slowness that made me keep going. I saw a message on your phone last night, I said. Just a preview. It said, don't say that in front of her again. Who was that? For a second he didn't answer. Then he set the phone screen down on the counter and took a sip of coffee. You were looking at my phone while I was asleep. I looked at the screen when it lit up. That's not really different. I stared at him. It is if it's sitting on our dresser. He gave a short exhale through his nose, not quite a laugh. Mara. This is what I mean. What do you mean? His voice stayed maddeningly even. You take 1/2 second detail and build a whole emotional architecture around it. I felt myself go still. That's a very polished sentence. He looked at me then properly. I'm late, and that was it. No answer. No explanation. Just the implication that my question itself had been the breach. He left with a kiss to my cheek and a hand at my waist, the exact same way he had left on 100 ordinary mornings. I stood in the kitchen after the door shut, listening to his car back out over the wet gravel in the alley, and felt something cold settle deeper in me than anger. That afternoon, around 3:30, my cell phone buzzed while I was crouched in the children's section restacking board books after toddler time. Unknown local number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. Mrs. Whitfield, a woman asked. Yes, this is Janice Bell's office. I'm calling to confirm tomorrow's document review at 10. I straightened so fast I knocked a copy of Goodnight Moon sideways off the low shelf. I think you have the wrong number. There was a small pause, the sound of papers shifting. This number was listed on Mr. Ethan Whitfield's intake file for joint marital document review. My mouth went dry. Tomorrow, I said. Yes, ma'am. 10 a.m. If there's a scheduling conflict. No, I said too quickly. No, I just... Thank you. When I hung up, I stood there among the little alphabet rugs and plastic bins of picture books with my phone in my hand, and that same strange feeling from the kitchen the night before, like furniture had been moved in the dark. Ethan came home cheerful, or a very good imitation of it. I waited until he'd set his briefcase down. A lawyer's office called me today, I said. His face did not change enough. Okay, yes. He loosened his tie. I was going to tell you. They said I'm scheduled for a joint document review tomorrow morning. He leaned against the counter, all weary composure. Mara, we need to have some adult conversations. The humiliation in that moment was so clean it almost felt sterile. Not because he had called a lawyer, not even because he had not told me, because he was standing in our kitchen talking like I was the last person being informed of my own life. You already had the conversation, I said. You just didn't have it with me. His jaw tightened slightly. That's unfair. Is it? Yes. Then softer with that same awful patience. And this is exactly why I wanted the meeting in a structured environment. I looked at him for a long second. Then I nodded once because I could already hear how my voice might sound if I kept going. The next morning, Janice Bell's office was in a squat brick building near downtown with fake ficus trees in the lobby and coffee that smelled burned. Ethan sat beside me in the waiting room with his ankle crossed over his knee, scrolling calmly through emails. A receptionist in a mauve cardigan handed me a clipboard. Just your intake confirmation and contact verification, she said. My name, my address, my phone number. I turned the top page over, and there it was, a packet already partially completed in typed print. At the upper right corner, clipped beneath the firm letterhead, was the file opening date. March 3rd. I stared at it. Today was March 26th. Ethan had told me 2 nights ago, looking me right in the face in our kitchen, that I was building meaning out of little things. My fingers tightened on the paper until the corner bent under my thumb. He had opened the file 23 days earlier, before the change passcode, before the late-night messages, before yesterday's soft voice and adult conversations, before he told me anything at all. I sat there in the waiting room with the clipboard in my lap and the date burning through me, and understood with a cold, exact clarity that he had begun preparing for the end of our marriage, while he was still teaching me to mistrust the part of myself that noticed. I kept my eyes on the date until the numbers stopped feeling like numbers and started feeling like a hand at the back of my neck. March 3rd. I heard the receptionist say something about initials on page 2, but her voice seemed to come from the far end of a tunnel. Ethan sat beside me in the waiting room as if nothing had shifted, one knee bouncing once in a measured little rhythm, his phone in his hand, his face composed. If I had looked at him from across a grocery store, I would have thought he was a man about to discuss taxes or refinancing. Something dull, something shared. Not this. I signed where they told me to sign because not signing would have felt like fainting in church. Public. Female, confirming every small, quiet thing I had spent my adult life trying not to confirm for people. When the receptionist led us back, Janice Bell stood up from behind a walnut desk and reached out first to Ethan. Good morning, she said. Her voice was clipped and low. Come on in. Not warm, not cold, just practiced. She shook my hand second and looked at me for exactly 1 beat longer than politeness required, as if measuring whether I understood where I was. The office smelled faintly of toner and old carpet. There was a legal pad laid squarely beside a laptop, a box of tissues no one had touched, and a framed black and white print of the Dayton skyline behind her chair. Ethan took the seat nearest Janice without hesitation. I sat across from them both and laid the clipboard on my lap because I needed something to hold. Janice opened a folder. This is an initial review only. No one is signing a final agreement today. We're just making sure the asset list, debts, timelines, and preliminary expectations are accurate before anything moves further. Asset list. Debts. Timelines. The language moved past me like clean cold water over stone. Ethan folded his hands. That's all I've been trying to tell her. Her. The word itself wasn't the injury. It was the ease of it. The way he could talk about me like I was a weather system he had been monitoring. I turned my face toward Janice before I answered because I could already feel my voice wanting to split into too many tones at once. I wasn't told there was a file open until yesterday, I said. Janice's expression didn't change. My understanding was that this meeting had been discussed in general terms. Ethan gave the smallest sigh, the one he used when he wanted a third person to feel sorry for how hard he was trying. I have tried to discuss it. A few times. It's been difficult to find a calm window. I felt something hot and humiliating move through me. Because there it was again. Not a lie exactly. Something worse. A description arranged so that if I objected, I would step right into it. Janice looked down at the folder. Let's stay with facts. For one brief second, I loved her for that. She moved through the first pages. Mortgage balance. Checking and savings. Ethan's retirement account, Nissan account. My library salary. The Honda Civic, with the dent in the rear bumper from when a teenager backed into me in the library parking lot last fall. The ordinary wreckage of a life reduced to columns. When she asked how long we had been in the Kettering house, Ethan answered before I could. 2 years in this rental. Before that, an apartment near Belmont, I said. We've been married 3 years. It came out sharper than I meant it to. Janice nodded once, made a note, and kept going. Ethan's jaw moved. He hated being interrupted when he was performing reasonableness. I knew that look. I'd seen the early version of it the first Thanksgiving he spent with my family when Aunt Rita brought up my mother over canned cranberry sauce and said with the casual cruelty of certain older women, "Well, Elaine always did feel things bigger than other people." Ethan had reached for my knee under the table and squeezed once like support. On the drive home, he told me Aunt Rita was from a different generation and I shouldn't let small things get inside me. At the time, I thought he was protecting the evening. Now sitting in Janice Bell's office, I remembered that he had not asked how I felt about hearing my mother turned into shorthand. He had only asked me not to react in a way other people could use. The memory landed differently now. Harder. Janice turned a page. There are communication records attached to the intake summary for context, she said. Mostly just scheduling and a few notes. Ethan shifted slightly. Those won't be necessary. That made her glance up. If they're in the file, I'll review them. It was a tiny thing, almost nothing, but I felt the room move half an inch. She clicked into something on her laptop, frowning faintly. Looks like one of the synced exports pulled in text fragments from your linked device. She looked at Ethan. Did you mean to include message records? No, he said quickly. Then slower, probably a technical error. Janice adjusted her glasses and scrolled. My pulse began to pound in my throat so hard it hurt. Ethan's hands, which had been so still, flattened on his knees. The silence in that office changed shape. I thought of my mother then in a way I had not let myself think of her in years. Not in the flattened family version. Not anxious Elaine, sensitive Elaine, difficult Elaine. I thought of her in a yellow raincoat in the Kroger parking lot when I was 12, laughing because a paper bag had split and rolled apples clear across the wet asphalt. I thought of her kneeling on the floor by my bed when I had pneumonia, rubbing my back in slow circles and saying, "Your body's scared, honey, but scared isn't the same as broken." I thought of how carefully she used to speak when she was trying to tell the truth and not frighten anyone with it. Janice's voice cut through me. I'm going to read one line and then I need clarification. Ethan sat up straighter. Janice. She ignored him. If she starts second-guessing herself, the rest gets easier. She looked directly at Ethan. What exactly does that refer to? I didn't breathe. He gave a short exhale. Private frustration. Out of context. Janice scrolled again. Her face, which had been professionally blank, changed by 1 degree. Not shock. Recognition. She read another line. Don't push too hard. Once she thinks she's spiraling, she'll back off on her own. The room seemed to narrow around the edges. I heard myself say very quietly, spiraling. Ethan finally looked at me, and for the first time all morning his composure had a seam in it. Mara, you know how texting works. People use shorthand. They vent. I might have believed that once. I might have clung to it because the alternative required a different kind of marriage than the one I thought I had been living in. But there was more now. Janice kept reading, not aloud at first, just to herself, and whatever she found there made her set both palms on the desk and lean back. When were these messages sent? I asked. Janice checked the timestamps. Over several weeks. Several weeks. Not one bad night, not one ugly impulse. Several weeks of language, several weeks of planning a version of me I would be trapped inside. Ethan's voice took on that lower register he used when he wanted to sound not merely calm but benevolent. This is exactly the problem with partial records. She hears one phrase and no, I said. It surprised all 3 of us. I felt my hands shaking in my lap and laid them flat against the clipboard to stop it. No, I said again, steadier this time. Don't do that in here. Janice looked at me, attentive now in a way she had not been 10 minutes earlier. I swallowed. My mouth tasted metallic. He says things softly when he wants me to sound unstable. He always has. He says I'm tired or keyed up or taking one detail too far. He uses my mother when he does it. The word mother sat there between us. Ethan's face tightened. That is not fair. There was a time when fair was the word that would have shut me down. Fair had ruled my whole marriage. Fair to him. Fair to context. Fair to stress. Fair to not making a scene. Fair to not becoming the woman who heard danger everywhere because she had inherited a nervous system people already mistrusted. Janice's eyes moved back to her screen. Then she read the line that made everything I had been trying not to understand collapse at once. Her mom's history helps. She's terrified of sounding like her, so if I stay calm, she folds herself for me. I stared at the grain of the walnut desk because looking at Ethan then would have broken something inside me too fast to survive. And in that one terrible second, I understood that my marriage was not failing because he had lied or drifted or even planned ahead. It was failing because he had learned the shape of my oldest wound and built a method out of it. For a long second, nobody in that office moved. The heat had gone out of my body. I was cold all the way through, but it was a clean kind of cold. Not panic, not confusion. Something more exact than that. The kind that comes when a thing finally stops changing shape in front of you and becomes what it is. Ethan looked at Janice first, not me. That is not what it sounds like, he said. Janice took off her glasses and folded them carefully on the desk. It was the first unhurried thing anyone had done since she started reading. Then tell me what it sounds like. He let out a breath and sat back, reaching automatically for composure. It sounds like private language between an upset husband and his attorney. Which is what it was. Mara has a tendency to internalize things in ways that make ordinary conflict harder than it needs to be. I was trying to explain the pattern. The old version of me would have felt that sentence land and immediately started rearranging myself around it, trimming away anything too emotional, preparing to make my pain presentable. I knew the motions of that dance so well I could have done them half asleep. Instead, I sat very still and listened to him describe me in the same smooth tone he used for restaurant servers when his order was wrong. Janice did not put her glasses back on. You said her mother's history helps, she said. Helps what? Ethan's face tightened just briefly. Helps explain why she reacts the way she does. No, I said. My own voice surprised me again, but less this time. I turned to Janice. He doesn't mean explain. He means predict. Ethan looked at me then, and what showed in his eyes was not remorse, it was irritation. He had lost control of the room, and irritation was what sat underneath his patience when it failed. That's not fair, Mara. There it is, I said. Janice glanced between us. I kept my eyes on Ethan now because I had spent too many years talking around things that were sitting in front of me. You always say fair when you want me to stop. His mouth opened then closed. I could feel my pulse in my throat, but it no longer felt humiliating. It felt like blood, like proof that I was inside myself again. You say I'm tired. You say I'm spiraling. You say I'm taking one thing and turning it into a story. You say you're trying to keep things calm. And what you mean is that you need me doubting myself before I can finish a sentence. Mara, he said quietly in that warning voice he had used in kitchens and cars and once in my aunt's driveway after I cried over something cruel Aunt Rita said about my mother. No, I said, and there was no shake in me at all now. Don't say my name like that, not this time. The room went very still again. I looked at Janice because I wanted another person in that office to hear it clearly, not as a wife's grievance but as language with bones in it. He's been telling me for months that the problem is how I hear things I said, not what he says, not what he hides, how I hear them. And I kept trying to be calm enough to prove him wrong, which was stupid. Because the calmer I tried to be, the easier it got for him to act like I was the one distorting reality. Ethan shifted in his chair. That is not what happened. I turned back to him. Then why did you tell your lawyer I fooled myself for you? That hit. I saw it. Not guilt. Exposure. He looked down for the first time since we sat down. Janice opened the file again, not reading yet, just resting her hand on the papers. Mr. Whitfield, she said, I need to be very clear. Frustration between spouses is one thing. Strategic use of a person's grief history and psychological vulnerabilities during divorce preparation is another. He sat up straighter. That's a dramatic interpretation. No, she said, it's a legal and ethical concern. Something loosened in my chest so suddenly it almost hurt, not because Janice was rescuing me. She wasn't. She was simply refusing to let the room pretend not to know what it knew. Ethan seemed to understand that too. His calm changed quality. It stopped looking like care and started looking like a man trying to keep his footing on polished tile. I did not manipulate her, he said. I was trying to navigate a difficult situation with someone who can be very emotionally reactive. I almost laughed then. Not because it was funny. Because the sentence was so perfectly built, so polished, so dead. A sentence that could live anywhere and mean nothing until it landed on a specific woman long enough to wear her down. Emotionally reactive, I repeated, You know what I mean. Yes, I said. I do now. My hands were no longer shaking. I laid them flat on the desk and let myself feel the grain of the wood under my palm. My mother had anxiety, I said. Real anxiety. Hard years, embarrassing years, human years. And after she died, people who should have loved her better turned that into a story they could use whenever her feelings made them uncomfortable. They made her smaller and simpler so they didn't have to deal with the full truth of her. I heard my own breath slow and even, and I married a man who learned that story well enough to use it on me. Ethan's expression changed at last. He looked less controlled now, less patient, more like a man caught wearing someone else's face. That is unbelievably unfair. No, I said. Unfair was listening to you use the word spiral in my own kitchen while you had already opened a file behind my back. Unfair was letting me think I was imagining things you were writing down as strategy. Unfair was turning my mother into a tool. The last sentence landed harder than I expected. Maybe because it was the truest. Janice did something then I will always be grateful for. She did not look embarrassed for me. She did not soften the room or reach for sympathy. She simply nodded once slowly, like a person marking the place where truth had finally become plain. I don't think this meeting can continue in its current form, she said. Ethan turned toward her sharply. Janice, no. Her voice stayed level. I represent clients in contested divorces all the time. I do not proceed as if there is nothing irregular here when there is language in this file indicating deliberate emotional destabilization for leverage. That changes the ground we're standing on. He stared at her. So what exactly are you saying? I'm saying, she replied, that any further process should happen with separate counsel, and I strongly suggest Mrs. Whitfield obtain her own representation immediately. Mrs. Whitfield. It was the first time that morning anyone in that room had used a title for me that didn't shrink me. Ethan stood then too fast. His chair rolled back half an inch. This is ridiculous. No, I said quietly. It's just the first time it hasn't gone your way. He looked at me like he had never seen me before, and in a way maybe he hadn't. Or maybe he had only ever seen the version of me that stayed busy making him comfortable. I was trying to keep this civil, he said. I stood too. The difference between us then was not volume or posture, or who had better facts. It was that I was no longer inside his sentence structure. You were trying to keep me unsure, I said. There's a difference. He said my name again, but it had no shape around me now. Just sound. I picked up my bag, the clipboard, my coat. Ordinary things. The kind of things women have been gathering from tables and chairs while leaving rooms for centuries. But I had never done it feeling so entirely present inside my own body. At the door, I stopped and looked back at him. You kept acting like the worst thing here would be if I sounded too much like my mother, I said. But the worst thing is that you never understood her at all. His face went blank. She was not weak because she was scared, I said. And I am not irrational because I noticed you. Then I walked out. The cold outside hit my lungs like water. The parking lot behind the building was wet from old snowmelt, the sky a flat Ohio gray that made every car look duller than it was. I stood beside my Civic with my hand on the handle and didn't get in right away. My whole body felt strange, emptied and overfull at once. I called Aunt Nora from the car. She answered on the second ring. Well, for a second I couldn't speak. Not because I was falling apart, because I wasn't. He used Mom, I said finally. He used the way people talked about her. On purpose. Nora was quiet long enough that I knew she was choosing her words. That was one of the things I loved about her. She was not a woman who confused speed with honesty. Then she said, I should have broken somebody's teeth years ago for how they talked about your mother. I let out one breath that turned into something close to a laugh and not close to tears. She would have hated that sentence, I said. Yes, Nora replied. But she'd have known what I meant. I drove home slowly. Past the gas station where the price board kept blinking one digit out. Past the little church with the white sign announcing a fish fry on Friday. Past the elementary school playground where the swings moved slightly in the wind even with nobody on them. The whole city looked exactly as it had looked that morning, which felt almost offensive. I had expected some acknowledgement from the world. But maybe this was adulthood. Life goes on being embarrassingly ordinary even when something central has been named. The house was quiet when I got there. Ethan's coffee mug was still in the sink from breakfast. A dish towel hung over the oven handle. My library tote sat by the back door where I'd dropped it the night before. Nothing had changed, and because of that, everything had. I took off my coat and walked upstairs to the bedroom. The cedar chest sat at the foot of the bed where it had sat since my mother died. It was one of the few things of hers I'd kept for myself instead of letting Aunt Nora store them in the basement or handing them off to cousins who suddenly wanted pieces of Elaine once she couldn't complicate them anymore. For years I had opened it carefully, almost apologetically, like grief was something that needed to be done in private and quickly before it became excessive. I knelt on the rug and lifted the lid. Cedar old wool, a faint sweetness from some long ago sachet that had finally stopped smelling like anything but memory. Her blue sweater was folded on top. It was not a beautiful sweater, just soft from wear with one cuff slightly stretched and a tiny loose thread near the hem where she used to catch it on the kitchen drawer pull. I sat back on my heels and touched it with both hands. For years I had carried a shame I never named properly. Not just fear of becoming my mother, fear of becoming the version of her other people found easiest to survive. I lifted the sweater out of the chest and held it against my face. The wool was cool at first, then warmer. I closed my eyes. There was no revelation in that moment. No music, no certainty, no magical feeling that everything broken had reassembled itself neatly around a lesson. My marriage was still over. The man I had trusted most had still studied my tenderness like an access point. I would still have to find a lawyer, call people, make decisions, divide books and dishes and years. But under all of that there was something steadier than victory. I was not ashamed. Not of my mother, not of myself, not of the fact that I had seen what I saw. I sat there on the bedroom floor a long time with the blue sweater pressed to my face and the late afternoon light moving slowly across the quilt, and for the first time in years, even in my own mind, I did not apologize for how deeply I felt what was true.